me continue recording. All right, so a couple of things here. Let's start this off. Let's review kind of again. If you came in sort of late, I'm gonna have my email open. Hopefully, there's always a few who don't see the announcements and then they don't come in. I'm just gonna run through really quick let's see, the homework, kind of like what we're going to. Let's see, your homework assignments and let's see, the lesson, all that good stuff. And then I'm going to go through how to do it, kind of like just to kind of get you started and how you should begin your project, and then open it up to any questions. So let's see, this is 258. Let's go to lessons. All right, I'm going to drag this over. All right, so we are on really module two. So this is all kind of a big module one thing here. And if you guys are interested, I have an interview with Tim Seeley. I'm going to try to have him speak again. I have another guy who's a famous children's book author. I'm going to ask him. He already agreed to do the talk, and then I have this other talk with Victoria here. That's going to be this semester, so you guys will be able to jump in, which is pretty cool. Your homework assignment is to finish this first part of the visual scripting. So if we click on this, you can see here. It says follow the provided visual scripting tutorial, record gameplay, upload to YouTube. If you need an example of what other people's work is, just as a reminder, you can go up here to examples of student sites. And these are examples of students' work. And you could see like here's Cecilia's and here's her monster game. So if you click on that, you can see this is her monster game. The instructions, this is a two-part assignment. There's visual scripting part one, which is this right here. And then next week is visual scripting part two. That's going to be the second part of your assignment. And I will get this all sorted out so that the actual visual scripting assignment shows up underneath there. It's still a little bit weird. I don't know why Sakai isn't allowing me to save. But it's actually, this is the second part of the visual scripting, so I need to reword that. So this is visual scripting assignment 6. So I'll go in there and I'll fix it. So, but all you have to be concerned with right now is doing this. And if you have fun doing it and you have time on your hands, you can immediately jump into visual scripting part 2. Okay. So let's open that up a little bit. You can see here, the first thing I have you do is most of you are going to have to install Unity 6. So you could probably skip this video here. I am going to go back in, and this entire lecture that we're having one-on-one is going to go inside of there. But here's here's all of these videos. I uploaded a precursor, like this is what essentially I'm going to lecture on in class right now, just so you have a second copy of that inside of here. And I usually do that anyway. So like you'll have like 3 different copies of the lecture just to kind of reinforce it. The one thing I don't have inside of here is how to make a project and stuff. So I'm going to show you that now. So a couple of things is this is a 2D example. I'm going to show you in a 3D example because I think it's just kind of cool for you guys to, just see different ways of doing the same thing for different types of games. So if we go ahead and start off with sort of the beginning. So here we are. This is Unity Hub. I work on a lot of games, right? I'm also like constantly, let's see if I could find, like, here's some of my other work that I'm doing. Like, I can, like this is some other game work. I'll just kind of show you so you guys can enjoy seeing like, professional environment. And this is all release stuff, so it's not like anything I can't show you. But this is all in Unity. So this is more Unity stuff. This is professional game development stuff inside of here. By the end of the semester, you'll feel a little bit cooler. You can see that there's these walls here. You're going to be doing a lot of this Pro Builder stuff later on your own. So I'm going to close this out for a second so that my computer doesn't. And you'll notice even in professional environments, we get crashes. Not a big deal. Nothing to freak out about. So you'll have that too. All right, so let's go back to Unity Hub, which is here. Hopefully I'm not wearing down my computer too much. The first thing you're going to do is you should have everything installed. And I want you to click on New Project. And inside of this new project, you're going to see there's Universal 2D Core and there's Universal 3D Core. Okay. Generally, if we're making a 2D game, you want to go with 2D core. But because the project you're going to have after this is actually a 3D game, we're going to select Universal 3D Core, and then you're just going to name this project your last name, games. And the reason for that is it gives you ownership. Like you feel like you really own, those things. You really own the game itself, right? Like it's kind of your baby. And let's see. I see Brendan just got in. Let me add him to the attendance. Sorry. Sorry to get distracted. I just don't want to leave anybody out. All right. So you want to select Unity 3D Core, and it tells you here, this template includes the settings and assets you need to start creating with the universal render pipeline. This is what we want. You don't want to do high definition. High definition is if you're doing like a console game. Plus, many of you probably have like mid-tier Apple laptops, and those aren't necessarily powerful enough to run an like you need a pretty beefy machine. So I'm going to go ahead and hit create project, and I'm just going to let it create on my system. Now, this usually takes, anywhere from, depending on how fast your system is, like a few minutes to 10 minutes to have a new Unity project spit up. And what's it called? So I'm going to kind of go through what we're doing first is we're doing we're creating a game using something called visual scripting. Now, my question for you is, does anyone have any younger cousins or nieces or whatever that go to like Code Ninjas or anything like that? Anyone? Nobody? Um, so is anyone familiar that they're kind of like a big thing now where they want to teach kids to code? Has anyone heard that at all? Well, this is why I don't like teaching online. I mean, I love teaching online because it kind of saves us the trouble and the headache of trucking it through bad weather or whatever. It's just like you're probably all playing like Super Smash Brothers or Luigi's Mansion or something. I'm just gonna keep it game related. No, it's just very easy to like not kind of like engage in the lecture. All right, so a couple things. Right now, the first steps that they teach anybody learning to code is they use something called a node-based system, which I'm going to show you right now. So inside of this, when you first open Unity, generally the layout is this one. So I'm going to go up to the top here and I'm going to do 2 by 3. This is generally the layout you'll first see inside of Unity. And I absolutely love game development and I love Unity. And the system itself can be pretty daunting when you first see it. It can be scary. Now, what we're going to do is I'm just going to show you how I set it up. So the first thing I do is I usually grab my project and I dock it down here. And then this is how I pretty much work every single time. So we have let's kind of just go through the entire interface. The first thing that's really important is this area called the hierarchy. And you can see that each tab has a name. The hierarchy itself consists of these different elements. So right off the bat, it gives you a main camera, a directional light, and a global volume. Global volume is what gives it this cool look. This is really anything that's inside of your scene. So notice when I click around here in the main camera and I hit F to focus, that it focuses in on my main camera. My main camera is actually what I'm looking at down here. This is my game view. So this is the actual game that people play. So I'm going to right click in here and I'm going to go to 3D object and I'm going to create a cube. And what happened is it actually created a cube in my scene. Now we don't see it in here. And the reason for that is because its current position is at -10. So if I make this position 0, 0, this is the center of my world. And you can see here that my main camera is actually at -10 and it's 1 degree up on the y-axis. How do I know what an axis is or what axes are? This is in move mode. Do you see how there's a green and there's a blue and a red and there's a green, blue, and red here on this? This is called an axis controller. If I select my move tool, I can move my camera up and down. I can move it in and out. And I could also, by left clicking and dragging on this, I can move this around. I don't expect you to retain any of this. You'll be building so many games that you'll become an expert in the Unity interface by the end of the class. So just understand that your hierarchy is all of the junk that's inside of your scene that makes up your game. Down in here, there's our project tab. I generally click these 3 little lines and I make it a 1-column layout. And this is all of the things that are on your hard drive that you could drag into your game. So like say you make some art or some code or whatever, you'll generally put it inside of here and then you'll drag it into your scene. When you select anything in our scene, so for example, there's a directional light here, there's this tab over here called the inspector tab. And the inspector is made up of components. So there's the transform component, the light component, the emission component, the rendering component, and the shadows component. Each one of these components is what makes up or allows this light to do whatever it's supposed to do. So for example, we're at 50, minus 30, and 0. This light is a directional light. It's attached to the sun. So if I start to rotate this light, you'll see it becomes dark and it becomes light, right? Same thing on the y-axis. If I just kind of rotate this, it can become dark and it can become light. So it's kind of just this setup. If I want to change the color of the light, I can add like a bluish tint to it. I can do green, yellow, all of this stuff. It just affects the lighting in my scene. So that's kind of the setup, the basic setup. Now, the way that I'm able to move around in my scene is I can scroll my wheel in and out. I can middle mouse click. This is why I told you guys get a mouse, get a cheap mouse, and that lets me to pan. If I hold the Alt key in the left mouse, I can rotate around. If I want to rotate around a specific object, I can select it in my scene, like my cube, and I can hit F to focus. And now you can see I'm holding Alt and left. And then I can hit F again if I need to, and that'll kind of let me zoom out. But it's not doing it now because it's kind of like a double tap feature, I think. All right, so that's kind of the basics behind it. I'm going to go into my directional light, and for now, I'm just going to make it white. All right, so let's talk a little bit about really how do you construct a scene in your game, right? So I'm going to delete this cube, and I'm going to hit Shift A, or sorry, not Shift A. That's for my next class. Sorry, I'm going to right click in here, and I'm going to make a 3D object, and I'm going to make a plane. Notice that my plane, when it's constructed in the scene, it's offset. So I'm going to go ahead and click these three little dots and I'm going to reset. And this resets this area called the transform. Now I'd like my plane, let's say we're making a game where I have a character that's sort of like an endless runner game. I'm going to hit R and I'm just going to scale this out a little bit. And so you can see here that we have this rotation tool here. We have the move tool that we've been playing with. And then when I press R, I have this scale tool. So this is a way of manipulating 3D objects in our scene. All right, let's go ahead and create a character for our game to play in. So I'm going to right click in here and I'm going to make a 3D object and I'm going to just create a capsule. Now this capsule, I'm going to go into my inspector here and I'm going to rename it player. And this capsule is going to represent my player. So I'm going to hit W here. I'm going to bring it up. And what I'd like to do actually, and I do this all the time, is I always just kind of reset my object in the scene. And then I move it up and I sort of move it back. So I'm going to hold Shift and select both of these, or sorry, Control and select both of these and just move them back a little bit here. And then with my camera, I'm going to move it up a little bit like this and rotate it down, just so we're looking at our capsule. So we've essentially created the basics of a game. The next thing I want to do is inside of my assets folder, I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to call this art. And each one of these objects, these 3D objects, have different components. So for example, our player character, which is really just a capsule. In most games, I generally just kind of create these default 3D objects. And they're just placeholder until I get to the real art because I want the gameplay to be solid before I move on. So this object here it has a mesh filter, which is telling me, it's saying, okay, what object do you want to attach to this cube or like this game object? I want to add let's go ahead and just create an empty object. So this is an empty game object here. And what I'll do is I'll kind of run through each one of those components to show you how they work. So if I go to my player here and I right click and I copy this component, this is my mesh filter, and I go to this empty game object and I paste this, you could see it added a mesh filter capsule. That means I have a mesh attached to this, but we can't see it because the next option is this mesh renderer. This mesh renderer is what allows us to see the object in our scene. You see that? And then the next thing that we have is a capsule collider. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this guy. The capsule collider is our collision. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. I want to show you how this works. And our ground actually has a mesh collider. Colliders are what allow us to register things like if a bullet hits this character and it brings the health down, or if we move the object so he doesn't fall through the scene. So I'm going to add a component. This is called a rigid body component. Now, if you're taking my Blender course, my Blender and my animation course, you'll right off the bat be familiar with the rigid body because that's how we do physics inside of film as well. So if you add the rigid body component, this controls all physics in the scene. So I'm going to go ahead and press play. And what you'll notice is my capsule will now fall directly through that plane. But if I turn on my capsule collider and I press play, you can see that that collider is going to stop it because it's going to collide with this other object here. Now, what's cool about the physics is it takes into account the shape of your object. So if I go like this and I press play, you'll see that my capsule falls to the earth like that. All right, cool. All of that is great. And I'm going to move this character down. And this is going to be the starting point of our player in our game. But you might be wondering, okay, this is really great, but how do you turn something like this into a game? Right now, it's just kind of like a simulation. There's like a capsule falling to the ground. That's where visual scripting or scripting comes in. So we have our player here and a couple other things. Inside of this art folder, remember I right clicked, I went to create folder and I created art. I want to make it less drab, right? So I'm going to go inside of here and I'm going to create a material and I'm going to call this player material. And then I'm going to hit Control D and duplicate that. And I'm going to call this ground material. Now, a material is a component that we add on here that allows us to change the color of the object or the surface properties. So if I select player material and I drag it on here, let me shrink this down. You can see now the color of this player material is white. So I can go ahead and say, you know what, I'm going to make this character, I don't know, a pink. And then for the ground, I'm going to drag that ground material onto this object. And then for the ground, I'm going to make this a brown. So something like this. Not the prettiest two colors. Maybe we'll go with a light green or something. Okay. So now we have materials that are adjusting the surface properties of the object. We've got that stuff. If I don't like the lighting, I can actually, let me go ahead and just move this back a little bit so I can keep it nearby. I can say, you know what, I think that shadow's too long. I'm going to bring that down underneath. So we get something like that. Okay. So a game isn't really a game without interactivity. So with our player selected, the way that you add interactivity is by adding code or scripting. Well, you guys are going to be doing visual scripting first. So the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to go to add component and I'm going to start typing script and I'm going to add a script machine here. Now the script machine is the brain of the character, right? So this is the way of thinking about like, okay, a script machine is a machine that can take into scripting information and it can move our object around. But for that, we need to actually tell it what script we want to use. So inside of this assets folder, I generally create a new folder and I call it underscore scripts because the underscore brings it to the top. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and select this and I'm going to click new under a graph here. I'm going to go into that scripts folder and I'm going to call this player movement and I'm just going to hit save. Now you could see here it has a title and you could give it a summary like this makes the player move. And then the way that we use this, right? That alone, just all we did was add a brain to this, is we have to edit the graph. So I'm going to click this edit graph button, or I can go inside the scripts folder and double click this, and it'll open up the script itself. All right, come on, baby. All right, so here's my script. Because I have a really nice big monitor, I'm just going to dock it down here. So when you go to code something, and I might mix it up a little bit and have you guys do the programming of the maze game after this one so that you guys can learn how to script. We'll see how it goes. But overall, a script graph is really just a graph, and these are the nodes. When I keep talking about like a node, N-O-D-E, these are nodes. And what a node does is it allows us, it has some functionality built in. So for example, There are times when you want to set the player's health to 100%, right? Inside of a game. Or you want to constantly check if your player has been shot or if they've picked up anything. These two nodes are the most common nodes that you would use for a game. So, for example, let's talk about, well, how do I test this? How do I show you what this is? Well, I'm going to hold control and I'm going to right click or control and left click, I believe. And that opens up this node editor. These are all of the different nodes that you guys can use to make a game. You don't have to know all of them. You could just know which ones you'd like to use. So I'm going to add something called the debug node. Now, the debug log message node, what this does is it allows you to test your game while you're doing it. That's why it's called a debug. And again, word salad until we get into it. Right now, we're going to just use it to print text to the screen. So I'm going to go to window here, or you can hit Control Shift C, and I'm going to open up the console. I'm going to place this up here. So to see what this node does, I'm going to link these two nodes together. And then I'm going to add something called a string literal. What this does is this string literal is just a word. So for this word, I'm going to say hello from the graph. I'm going to grab this and I'm going to link it right into this message here. And I'm going to hit Control S to save this. And I'm going to press play. Pressing play is how we test our game. So you can see here it says hello from the graph. So that's all this does is at the very start of the game when I press play, it runs some functionality. We're going to actually make this character move in a little bit. But for now, I just want to show you briefly, like, uh, just want to show you briefly, like, how this works. Like, how these nodes work. Okay, so notice that it has a 1 here, and that means that this only runs one time. Update, on the other hand, if I take this and I plug it in there, it runs every frame. So what you'll notice is I'm going to right click on that, and then I'm going to hit Control S to save this. And what you'll notice up here is I'm going to press play, is it's going to display this thing. I might get 300 frames a second, and there's 30 frames in a second. Depending on how powerful your system is, I might get 300 frames. You could see that it runs over and over again. So when is some times that you'd want to use each one of these? Well, what you can do is something that you want to check all of the time when you're making a game, and you're going to be doing this all the time, is player input. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a node, and it's just called, input. And the input that I want to get is get access. It's this one down here. Now, what this does is, this will allow you see a controller here. This input get access here allows you to get the keyboard, the mouse, or a game controller in order to do something. So up at the top here, I'm going to go to edit. I'm going to go to project settings. And if we look inside of our project settings here, you'll see that there are some predefined inputs. So if I go to this input manager here and I open axes here, notice this is also called axes down here. There are some predefined axes in here. And one of them is called horizontal. And horizontal is just the keyword. So I'm going to click in there and copy it. And this word is mapped to the left arrow key, the right arrow key, the A key, and the D key. And if you look down at your keyboard, these keys are what we want if we want to make our character go left and right, like move horizontally. So let's go ahead and under axis name, I'm just going to paste in horizontal. And, oh, it looks like I have two L's. When I first put in there, I didn't see the L. So, and then what I want to do is I'm just going to leave this there for a second. Let's talk a little bit about how you could make this character move. So I'm going to actually grab this node here, this on update, and I'm going to drag this out, and I'm just going to start typing velocity. So, oh, this is 2D. I want 3D. Here it is, the top one. So because this has physics built into it, like this rigid body, one of the attributes, you see how it has all of these attributes, is actually velocity. So what I can do here is I can say on update, this is always running. And let's say I want to make it run, right? So I'd like it to move forward on the Z axis like this. Okay, so which axis is that? Well, that's this one right here, the Z axis, and allows me to move forward and back. How do I know that there's three little things here? You could see it as a transform component, and this also is a transform component. Velocity deals with this first slot, which is the position. So here we have Z. So if I go ahead and make this like 3 and I hit Control S, remember this runs every frame. When I press play, let's see what happens to our little capsule guy. You can see that he's moving forward. Now remember he has a physics on him and a rigid body, so he's kind of flipping. What I can do to stop that, and I'm going to make this a little bit faster by pressing 5, is I can actually go into this rigid body and I can freeze the X, Y, and Z rotations. And now the character will just move forward and it won't flip over. See that? Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to make it go, I'd like to control the left and right. And that's why we have this get axis horizontal. Now, what I need to do is I actually need to break, because there's only one slot here for X, Y, and Z. I actually need to break this up into 3 so that I can plug this into the X axis, which is allowing me to go left and right. So I'm going to drag this out and I'm going to do a vector 3 or create vector 3 here, which breaks this into X, Y, and Z. And for the Z, I want to make this a 5. And actually, what I can do to kind of help with this is I can actually make this a scene variable so that we can control it in here depending on how fast we want to do it. So inside of here, it says variables. If I click plus here, I have to enter a variable name. So we'll call this speed. We'll call this one forward speed. And I'll hit plus. And because this is a number, I'm going to make it a integer or a float. Float just means a number with a decimal. And I could just make this 5 here. Now, if I click on object here, you can see I have this forward speed variable. I can grab this, drop it in here, and I can link this in here. And now it'll take into account whatever we type inside of there. Now for the X, I'm going to do the same thing, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to do the same thing. I'm going to make another variable, and I'm going to call this horizontal speed. And I'm going to make this another float, and I'm going to drag this out. You can see it updates in my scene here. Let's move this down. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take whatever A and D is, or the arrow keys, and I'm going to multiply it times this this speed variable here, and I'm going to plug it inside of here. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And pretty easy. I know this seems like a lot, and it's really scary, but like I said, I've got all of this, including this video I'm recording now, and you're going to be doing an entire game built on this. So by the end of the game, it'll feel a little bit more comfortable. Now you can see as I'm pushing my A and D keys, I don't think it's got enough force. Let's add a lot more force here. Oh, it's at 0. That's why. Let's add 10 here. I'm going to go ahead and press play. So 10 times whatever A and D, which are those numbers up top, is how fast we're going to move. See that? And then I can actually fall off the edge. Well, I guess the velocity is going so fast that he's not falling that quickly. See that? So this is really a summation without the hooking up of art of what you're going to be doing. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording of what you're going to be doing as part of your assignment for this week. All right. So any comments at all? Let me see. How do I bring up this? Let me stop sharing for a second. All right. I want to hear comments. I want to hear anything like that. Anyone think this is interesting? If so, why? Can anyone see how this can connect to any other applications? I want to know if there's anyone else in this room with me right now in this Zoom call.
I have a question. I was
Yeah.
wondering for this week's assignment, are we going to be doing the monster game or is it going to be the one that you just like went through?
Oh, this is just the classroom demo of what the
Oh,
mechanics are
okay.
for the monster game. Yeah, you are 100% going to do the monster game. What I would suggest, because I do, let me actually stop the recording.